Hello, my fair friends. I'm Ruby Ruse, and today, as a guest on Fairy Fortunes, I have Chris Allaun, who is a healer, a teacher, and now an author of 2 books. We have them here for you. The first one was released was Underworld, and the second one that is available now is called Deeper into the Underworld. And we are here to learn more about these works and about what's coming up on horizon for you. You have a 3rd book that's coming out, is that true?
I do. I have a 3rd book. It's called Underworld, and I spent a lot of time with the ancestors and the hell worlds and demons and ghosts and all those things, and I thought, let's go in the opposite direction and talk about the gods and the angels and the higher spirits and the thunder beings and the stars and planets and all those things. And I have to tell you, doing the upper world was very fun because I spent so much time with the ancestors. It was like, oh, this is very fun and different and opposite. But I do have a lot of training and background in the upper world and planetary magic and ceremonial magic. And what I did with upper world is that I wanted to show that you can summon the gods and summon the planetary spirits without a 3-hour ceremony. And
accessible magic.
Absolutely. So it's very practical. I don't want to say easy, but I think it's easy. So it's a combination between shamanism, ceremonial magic, and conjure, all wrapped into one. So I will say it's very accessible.
Excellent, excellent. That's a lot of people think that magic is something that is reserved for only magical creatures such as myself, or people that have had vast training or were born into magic.
Right.
And it's very refreshing to hear someone of your caliber saying, no, this is something that's a part of the human experience, and it's something that you can use and learn
Right.
and work with on your own, no matter what your background is.
Absolutely.
So with the Underworld, because your first two books that are available now really focus on the Underworld, can you kind of explain what the Underworld is to people who really might not understand what an Underworld is?
So it depends upon the culture that you are aware of or what you grew up with, because the Greeks actually thought the underworld was under the earth. Like they used to have temples of the dead that were actually caves, and when a practitioner or whoever would go into the underworld, they'd go down into the cave and they'd have an experience. Energetically, all underworld means is that it's underneath the physical plane in an energetic way. So it's around us. The Native Americans believe, especially the Lakota, believe that when you die, you don't go off to some place, that your energy, your spirit is in the earth, the land, the hills, the sunshine and things. And that's one of the many reasons why when the Native American people had to give up their homeland, it was very traumatizing and very hard because their ancestors are tied in directly with the land. So the underworld, even the term itself, it helps us understand that the ancestral world, the primal world, is beneath the physical plane. So it helps us, like in a shamanic journey, if we see a tree or a pole or a hill, and we go under, because it helps our consciousness, it helps our awareness travel away from the physical plane.
So to think of it as terms as being an underworld, as being beneath, it's almost like a tool for the imagination.
Absolutely.
To give you to kind of open your mind and allow you to step into that world.
Absolutely, because when you become an adept at shamanism or journeying or astral projection, you don't need all those tools of going down. You can just think it and be there. But as you're practicing and learning, those tools of going down actually help.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the imagination. You actually talk about that in your first book, Underworld, which I have right here. You talk about imagination, and you actually pose a question to the readers of this book. Is this real? Is this really the underworld, or is this my imagination? And in the book, you actually say yes to both.
Right.
That it is actually both imagination.
And I was just thinking that as yes to both.
It is your imagination, because in my opinion, imagination is the gateway to magic. That's
Absolutely.
where magic begins. Can you kind of expound upon that?
So I look at it like this. I think of it's kind of like a virtual reality, and think of it this way. You know, in some cultures, how they say the gods made humans in their image. I take it to the idea of the universe made all creatures in their image, in the sense of the universe is similar to your brain, your mind. If you look at like how the universe is expanding in things, and you look at a brain cell, it has similar. It looks very similar. So that's actually confirmation for me that your brain, your mind, is the universe in a little teeny tiny shell. So that being said, whatever happens in your head, in your mind, visualizations, imagination also happens in the universe because it's connected. Essentially, that's how magic comes to be. You have to think it, believe it, and feel it, and then it can manifest on the physical plane. So when we're traveling, when we're journeying, when we're astral projecting, yes, think of your imagination as a vehicle, or how I like to think of it as a television. Like your physical body needs some type of something to be able to experience the underworld or the upper world or what have you. And in order to do that, it needs the imagination as a vehicle. So when people say, "Oh, when I was traveling or when I was journeying, I'm very aware of my physical surroundings, like the bed or the floor or the chair or the cat or whatever," and that's true because you're in your head, but your energy body is actually traveling. So it's kind of like maybe like a drone. So you know how drones, they go and take pictures, but you're at home watching it on your computer. So think of your energy body, your astral body, as the drone having these experiences, but your consciousness is actually at home in your mental TV watching these experiences. And we use and part of the imagination is that when you're the underworld, the other world is all energy, and the imagination helps take these very abstract energies and put them into a physical context that we can understand. That's also why they say, "Oh, why is it to the Greeks all the gods they look Greek, and to the Egyptians all the gods they look Egyptian?" Well, that's because we put it into we take the energies of these spirits and put them into a imaginary context that we can understand with our culture, our background, and our experiences. Because I mean, it's very hard to say hard. It can be very challenging to see pure energy and have a conversation with it. So we need our imagination to say, okay, I'm going to give this energy a head, maybe a gown, maybe fairy wings, and then I can more readily relate to those energies.
So if a complete novice, somebody that's completely new to alternative spirituality, or someone that wants to experiment with magic, if they want to enter the underworld and they have this very imaginative experience, then what I'm hearing you say is that is a true journey into the underworld.
Absolutely.
Is that, yes, you are using your imagination, but no, you really went there.
Yes.
So that they shouldn't feel that they have to defend that journey, that they shouldn't have to compare that journey to someone else's experience, that's truly real for them.
Exactly. And if we see things, I call it your psychic goggles. So we see the energy through our own personal experiences and lenses. So I may go to the underworld and see very beautiful and bright palaces and rainbows and things, and someone else, because they don't have that experience or it isn't in their imagination, they may see caves or they may see tunnels, and someone else may see a forest. And they're all correctly, but what's happening is that they're taking these energies and putting it to their own experience, so it makes sense to them.
And that they can have an experience and process the information that is trying to be conveyed expressly to them.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right.
So can the underworld be a frightening experience, do you think?
Sure. I live in Chicago, so Chicago can be a frightening experience depending upon where you are, and you have to think of it like that. So the underworld, again, depending upon the culture, and I talk about this especially in the first book, Underworld. So some ancient cultures, they thought of the underworld as a kind of a sewer or drainage ditch to where anything bad or old or dead went away, And then you have other cultures who thought that the underworld was a beautiful place of healing, of wonderful ancestors and spirits who help and teach and things like that. So I have found in my own experience that the underworld can have beautiful places of the ancestors and healing and oceans and fields and things like that. But there's also a part that can be very dark, and I don't think it's frightening. I think it's actually very cool to find the dark places, but
you can learn a lot of things from the dark places.
Exactly, and the dark places can teach you about yourself. It can teach you about your own fears, and I talk about this a lot in the books about how it's encouraged to go to these dark places, because the more that you address your own personal fears, the more healing and that you have on a personal level. And I think that if you are a healer or a leader in any way, shape, or form, you can't help someone else if you have a lot of baggage. And when we all have baggage, and it's okay, and it's healthy, and it's fine, and no judgment. But for the healer, as we heal others, we also have to learn to heal ourselves at the same time.
One question that's very important to me here on Fairy Fortunes, of course, is that a lot of people and authors associate the underworld and the land of the dead with the Fae. Would you say, as an expert kind of on this underworld journey, would you say that you see the Fae, and that would be the fairy creatures that I talk about so much on Fairy Fortunes, fairies like myself with wings, and then also the Leshies, the Alacantos, the unicorns and dragons. Would you associate those types of spiritual beings with the ancestors, with human beings that have passed on to an underworld?
Right.
Are they a part of the same world, do you think, or are they the same beings? Like, can you explain what your thoughts are on that?
So it actually bothers me when people believe that when you die you become a fairy. I mean, I think anything is possible. I think that the whole point of being alive on the physical plane is to have experiences and to spiritually evolve. So that being said, there are many cultures that believe that when you pray for the dead and when you have these experiences and evolve, you become deified. There's a belief that the Nordic gods, like Odin, Freyr, and Freya, they're actually human leaders, but were deified into gods because they were so loved in their communities that people prayed for them and gave them offerings, and they became deified. That being said, I don't see why, if you evolve to such a way that you become like a fairy or an elf. However, the dead and the elves and the fairies are not the same. It's a kind of like comparing a cat to a zebra. They they both have a spiritual form, but they are not the same. In fact,
Could you encounter fairies in the underworld?
I think you can. It's kind of like this. Part of where that comes from, that whole lore, especially in Europe, is the Hollow Hills. And the Hollow Hill just simply means it's a burial ground that you would put the bodies inside, especially of the noble peoples and the royal families and things like that, inside a burial mound, and it became a spiritual portal. What happened is that people have found that spiritual portal can take you to the fairy world, it can take you to the underworld, it can even take you to the upper world. So what happens is people who were not shamans and who were not magicians or pagans, they're like, oh, the Hollow Hills, there's fairies inside. And then someone else will say, no, it's the dead. No, it's the fairies. No, it's the dead. Well, they're both correct. It's kind of like picking up a phone. I can call Europe or I can call China. You know, the same idea. But they are definitely they're not the same. But see, I always try to keep my experiences open and my mind open, because I don't like to say, no, you will never find a fairy in the underworld, because the elves, the dark elves, are technically kind of in the underworld themselves, as where the dwarves are, but it isn't the land of the dead. It's a world separate from the land of the dead. And also, if you read a lot of mythology, the keepers of the dead, like Persephone and like Hel and so forth, they're very protective of the ancestors. Like, they don't want just anybody bothering them. But think of it this way: of we as humans have the power to journey into the world of the ancestors, and the elves and the fairy, and the fairies, who are these wonderful, powerful, magical creatures, but they also have the power to journey there as well. And so you may, of course, encounter them, but it isn't their home. That's not where they live.
Another question that I think really pertains to fairy fortunes is that in your book you talk a little bit about divination, which is exactly what fairy fortunes are. It's a divinational system that I designed myself that correlates to a Renaissance practice called geomancy. But you talk about divination being a tool in this plane that allows you to access information that is stored in the underworld.
Right.
So can you speak a little bit more about that?
How does that work? So you have to remember, the underworld world itself is just a plane of energy. And so time moves it differently. So there's a different cosmologies. It's like time begins in the upper world and then it flows down into the underworld and then it comes up to the physical place. So what happens is that the ancestors, they have the ability to see time pass. And I always view it like a river. So they're seeing these things. And the upper world is very abstract. It hasn't really congealed yet, and it doesn't come into like physical practice until it hits us here in the physical plane. So time is very abstract, and the event is abstract in the upper world, and it starts to form in the underworld. And as it flows, the ancestors have the ability to see a time and events, and so they can tell us what's going to pass. However, because it hasn't solidified in the physical plane, we can still change it. So whenever I do a divination or fortune telling or anything like that, I always tell all of the people who come to me that even though the ancestors see blank, we still have time to change it, you know, through our choices and through our actions and things like that. The thing I also caution people about, though, is that just how we just talked about how we see things through our own experiences, the ancestors also see things through their own experiences. So if they may say to you, "Oh my God, the most horrible thing is going to happen. You're going to move away to Canada, and that's horrible because you should stay with your family in Chicago." But to me, I'll be like, "Yay, Canada, that's amazing." So they still tell you things with their own experiences and their own prejudices.
So with divination, you would say you do have to be very careful about the biases.
Exactly.
So not just of your own personal bias, but especially if you are seeking assistance from an ancestor in the underworld, you may have to
filter
the message
yes.
from their biases of when
Right.
they were alive.
Absolutely. And I do think the ancestors evolve and grow, but you know how they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks? I think you can, it just takes a long time.
Definitely. So in your book, Underworld, you speak a great deal about myth.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
as a way to communicate to people about what's expected in the culture, not only for their life, but also what might be expected in death in the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak more, because I also focus a great deal on folklore and on fairy fortunes. I do have a series about fairy fortunes and geomancy, where I talk a lot about the folklore. So can you expound more about what the power of story means to you?
So the power of mythology and story, so again it goes back to these abstract energy ideas, and so I believe that the shamans, the teachers, the journeyers, they would see these events in the energy planes and the astral planes, and they would put it to their own cultural experience to tell a story. And we learn through mythology. I think part of how our brains work is we learn a great deal through storytelling. I also think that's why television is such a big deal and so popular, is because we love the story, and how we choose a mythology that we enjoy is how does that mythology relate to my own experiences. So for example, if you read something about a love story and you haven't ever had that experience, it's not going to have the same it's not going to have the same meaning for you. However, it's also a teaching tool to say, hey, we're all humans, we all have similar hiccups, we all have to breathe, we all have to eat, we all have sexual desires, we all have our egos. And so when you tell a story, especially a story that's tragic of, hey, if you do A, B, and C, this bad thing's going to happen. Also, it's when you read about the journey of the hero, which is a regular person, goes out into the world and has these experiences, and he was changed. So as you go out into your daily life, you will have experiences, and you will be changed as well. So mythologies and stories are teaching tools. Some mythologies are, like in the Greek mythologies about the underworld, it's a map. If you go left in the underworld, all these things will happen. If you go the other direction, all these things will happen. So the teaching tools, through direction sometimes.
So you're saying that if a new person to magic, like we were talking about before, is willing and ready to use their imagination to take this journey, that they could actually use their favorite story or their favorite myth.
So you can absolutely use whatever mythology that you choose. I often go back to the Greek mythology because a lot of people are aware of it, and we read some of them in school and things like that. But you can use it in the mythologies of Star Wars, of Lord of the Rings, of Harry Potter, or whatever. Because just the other day, I was watching Star Wars, and I thought, oh, okay, well, that's the upper world, that's the underworld, that's the demons you have to face. Oh, there's a place of healing there, so you can use whatever you like. You don't have to use like Egyptian or Native American. You can use whatever. You can use
So something with a universal truth that really speaks very personally to yourself.
Absolutely. In fact, you can use comics because a lot of the superheroes kind of resonate to the gods. I mean, think about it. You have Aquaman, who's the god of the sea. You have Superman, who's kind of like the god of the skies. You have Batman, who's kind of the god of the underworld. So comics have become our new mythology. The superheroes, they give us hope.
Yes, and isn't that what that's what the purpose of the divine is?
Absolutely.
So it's not that Thor himself is speaking to us from the comics, but that very specific energy, that universal truth is coming through in those stories. And if that has a resonance for you, if that brings you hope, then that is definitely something worthwhile. Absolutely.
And there's other comics besides, DC. I've seen things like Promethea is really good. Sandman is really good, and they have a lot of magical comics and pagan comics. I've seen comics that feature Hecate and Persephone and Diana and all those things. So,
because it's about addressing those darker points in human existence.
Absolutely.
And teaching us how to better ourselves and work through those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really the goal of any good story, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
So, where can someone find your books, would you say? This is the first book, this is called Underworld, and his second book here is called Deeper into Underworld. Where can people find these books?
So you can find them on Amazon. You can also find them directly from the publisher, Mandrake of Oxford, but it may take an extra day or two because they're in the UK. However, support your local occult shop. Support your local people. Here in Chicago, we have Alchemy Arts, but wherever you are, support your local shop. And if your shop doesn't have the books, ask them to get them. It's again from Mandrake of Oxford. They actually have a lot of great titles, a lot of authors that I actually use in the books as references.
Yes, there's a very extensive bibliography in both books, so if you are curious to learn from Chris's teachers on these topics, you can actually go there as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So you often host workshops here in the Chicago area. Do you have anything coming up in the near future?
I don't have anything coming up in the next. We're almost into the holiday season, so holidays are very challenging for people to come to workshops and things. But I'll definitely have workshops in 2019. So look out for those.
So they go to your social media
Yep.
profiles that are going to be linked in the description box below. You will be posting any teaching
Yes.
classes and workshops that are there. And you are also a regular healer here in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to receive a healing from Chris, you can definitely reach out to him on his social media sites and find out how to facilitate that.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. If you like this video, I do hope that you give us a thumbs up. Please let me know. It would be very easy, I think, to have Mr. Allaun back on the show. So if you would like to address some questions to him and perhaps have him back, please leave them in the comments below, and perhaps we can have him come back at a later date. Maybe after your third book comes out, which is called Underworld, which will be available in 2019.
Soon, yes, very, very soon.
And please subscribe, of course, and hit that notification bell for notices of future videos. And as always, have a fairyful day.
We have such a good flow, too. Okay. All right. I got the giggles on this. Okay, hold on.
Blooper reel!
I know. Let me just get in that place. Okay.